Zhongxing is famous as an agricultural area, rich in its horticulture, and it's no surprise that in New Zealand the Zhongxing people went into market gardening, providoring, seed merchants, fruit and vegetable selling. And of course for Dunedin people, we've been fed for generations by the Wongs and the Khans, people who come from this area and who transferred their skills to New Zealand.
Well, when the Otago Provincial Council invited the Chinese to rework the goldfields in 1865, they anticipated that the Chinese would become market gardeners as well. And this would be beneficial for the inland parts of Otago to offset scurvy. That was one thing. Dunedin also at that time was importing vegetables from Melbourne, and the first Chinese market gardens opened up in Dunedin in about 1866 or 1867. So that saw to some of the vegetable supply.
A lot of areas that are now residential around Dunedin in the early 20th century were big open parts of sort of semi-wasteland. They were turned into Chinese market gardens, such as here at Tainui, or indeed on the South Dunedin flat where King's High School is now, in Sawyers Bay and Kaikoura Valley, all over the place in fact. And there had been Wongs and Khans from Sartale village in Zhongxing here in Anderson's Bay market gardening from a very early point. And from that base, and there were Quoks as well from nearby Barkshek village, they spread throughout New Zealand such that there was a network of Zhongxing families with market gardens, stores, fruit shops all over the country through the 20th century, playing a very important role in the development of Chinese society and contributing to our economy and our society more generally. Here we are in Sartale village in Zhongxing County, and there were Wongs and Khans from this village in Anderson's Bay as market gardeners from a very early point. Now in the 1920s, men from that group, and led by prominent Dunedin Chinese Wong Chok Kong and Wan Ging Ai, raised funds to erect this impressive two-storey primary school back in their home village.
But the problem with all the market gardens that developed around Dunedin, somewhere in Mount Cargill, Leith Valley, Kaikoura Valley, the biggest one was Kaikoura Valley that we know of, that was a local garden, they didn't re-fertilise the soil, and as the years went by the crops got weaker and weaker and it wasn't so productive.
Although the productivity of market gardening reduced as the decades passed, the remittances sent back to counties like Zhongxing were still an important lifeblood for those communities. Now, up until 1949, there was a lot of back and forth with these Zhongxing families to New Zealand. The men would work for a time in New Zealand and they'd come back to their home villages. Oftentimes while they're there, they'd take money home and they would build new houses for the family. Quite impressive structures like this one behind us. Villagers have told us this was built by a New Zealand family and it's not occupied now. Now there's lots of more development all around it today, so it's not so outstanding, but in its day, a building like this would have been quite a grand edifice representing all that effort in New Zealand to improve life at home.
The Guangzhou, southern China places, a lot of people go overseas to try to make some extra money for retirement or live better.
I'm here in Gualeng village in Zhongxing, and it's a beautiful place, replete with evidence of New Zealand money flowing back here and helping build schools and renovate houses and that sort of thing. But one of the most outstanding pieces of evidence of the New Zealand connection is this fortress tower behind me. Now the reason many Zhongxing people went out to New Zealand was because of the banditry and unrest that was prevalent in this area through the early 20th century. And it had ramifications for the families when they came back here, or when, as they did in many cases, send their sons back here for education, because the bandits would pick out those wealthy overseas Chinese as targets and kidnap them for ransom. So a tower like this was both to defend the village against bandit raids and a place of refuge for the boys to go when these raids were on, so they wouldn't be picked up and taken away for ransom. So that was built with New Zealand money to defend New Zealand Gumsan returnees here in Guilin. Just to the south of Zhongseng County is Dungun County. From there, a Chinese came and established himself at Butcher's Gully near Alexandra. He was to pioneer fruit orchards in central Otago. You know, there are various places around Otago where place names reference the Chinese presence, but it's not very often that relates to a particular individual. But that's the case here, just near Alexandra, where Laibo Road and Laibo Reserve. Remember, a Cantonese gold seeker, Lai Bu, from Dungun County, just near Guangzhou City, we remember him now as Laibo. He came here in the 1870s, and for a long time he was involved in gold seeking. But then he turned his attention to market garden and developing an orchard with commercial fruit trees, apricots, of which he was probably the pioneer in central Otago. Of course, this area became synonymous with such fruit growing later on. Now, one of the great assets that Laibo had in this area was that he had a water right from his gold mining days from Butcher's Creek. And that was pivotal to his fruit trees flourishing and his market garden operations. But at a certain point it drew on him a lot of jealousy, but he cunningly made a deal with the Alexandra Borough Council that in return for giving his water right to the town, which was then the town's first reliable water supply, they gave him some money, but they also let him keep using some of the water for his orchard and market garden. And so he prospered and continued, employed other Chinese here, and lived for a long, long time. In fact, it wasn't until 1930 when he accidentally tripped over, fell down a bank and died from his injuries that he perished. Locals at the time estimated that he was probably about 100 years old. We don't know if that's the case, but he was certainly a very old man and a widely revered figure in the district, so much mourned at the time. And here behind me we can see some of the remnant structures from his operation. Some of his old fruit trees are still there, part of one of his storehouses, some fences and things, and as I say, most importantly, his name imprinted on the landscape. Chinese around Dunedin soon held a strong monopoly on the fruit and vegetable trade. They also branched into providoring and gained a reputation as hard, fair workers and salespeople. Once the gold ran out, the Chinese moved into the towns and cities and spread north right through New Zealand. And a couple of areas of the economy, there were openings for them. Obviously the market gardening thing that they'd been into already. Also the fruit shops, the laundries, but the fruit shops in particular, they were everywhere. A place like Dunedin, you would find them on every sort of corner, and even in the main street here, George Street, between Frederick and Hanover, there were 3 or 4 Chinese fruit shops here. One of the most successful of them is here at 350 George Street, the Wing On. It belonged to Ga Wing Gai, born in China in 1903, came out here first as a 16-year-old and he had to pay the £100 poll tax. Went back and forth between China and New Zealand, worked on market gardens here with his father, his uncle, and did it really hard. In the 1930s though, he went back to Hong Kong and he married a New Zealand-born Chinese from Sa Tau, Eva Wong from Carterton. They came here and they settled in a flat here at 350 George Street, and later they opened a shop downstairs, the new Wing On. They lived here for a time and then they bought a house up in North East Valley, but their shop really prospered. In the 1950s, they opened it up to be the first open-fronted fruit store in Dunedin, and it really was the most successful fruit shop apart from the Sun in Rattray Street. Now, old Ga Wing Gai, he kept working till he was 90, and then he finally retired. He didn't die till he was over 100, 2007. And when he died, he was the last of his generation. Those old Chinese who'd come here in the early 20th century and done it really hard, paid the poll tax, and lived to see all the changes. Now his family moved on from the fruit shop as Khans. Now they are providors. There's plenty of them, and they're very proud of their history, which really goes back to here in George Street and Sawyers Bay. Here we are in Toi San County. It's got a very different feel to both Purniu and Zhongseng. There's not so much urbanisation or industrial development. Still plenty of fields with rice growing, and it's got a real agricultural feel to it. Really quite beautiful, actually. Now, this village, Suriname, in the 19th century had about 1,500 inhabitants, almost all of the Chin clan, and many men from this village came out to the Otago goldfields, where we know they operated in the Arrowtown, Macetown area. In the 20th century, they moved on to market gardening and laundry work, principally in Invercargill and Gore and Dunedin. And in fact, some of Dunedin's most prominent Chinese of the 20th century come exactly from this village. Among them, Chin Foy, the famous Dunedin laundryman, and Chin Bing Foon, who operated one of the most successful fruit shops in Dunedin. He came from here as well. So really, this is Chin Central, and Dunedin's mayor, Peter Chin, doesn't come from exactly this village, but his is very close to this. So really we're talking about Chin Central here in Toi San County. Another highly successful fruit shop in Dunedin was the Sun store down Rattray Street, operated by Chin Bing Foon. The son of a market gardener, Bing Foon arrived in New Zealand at the age of 11 in 1921. He worked at the Wing Un fruit shop before branching out on his own. In 1928, when he was 18, Bing Foon came back to Toi San, spent some time here, got himself a wife. She came from this village, which was then called Wong Wai Wu. It's got a completely different name now, and we had a real job finding it. She was 16 years old. Her name was Yuan An. Beautiful girl. Once they were married, they stayed together for a wee while in Suriname, had a son, but then Bing Foon went back to Dunedin and he established the Sun fruit shop in Rattray Street, which became one of the most prosperous businesses among the Chinese community in Dunedin. He came back again in the 1930s, had another son with Ngang An, back to Dunedin. Then in 1937, a friendly customs official tipped Bing Foon off that he actually could get permission to bring his wife and family out to New Zealand. And so he made the arrangements, and in 1938 they arrived, a whole year before the big group of wives and families that came out in 1939. Now, they lived in that first period in a small flat above a shop in Maclagan Street, and more children were born. Then after the war, when building restrictions had been lifted in 1946, the Chin family built the first modern home of any Chinese family in Dunedin, in William Street. Now, by dint of hard work and perseverance, Bing Foon did pretty well in Dunedin with his fruit shop, and he was able to send home a regular remittance. Every quarter, £10 came back here to the village for his family's support. Then in 1935, he came back himself with quite a sizable amount of money, such that he could build this two-storey house for the family here in the village. Really a great sign of prosperity that he could make such an impressive building. Now, when his father died, he also had constructed for him at great expense an elaborate feng mu. However, during the Cultural Revolution, the feng mu was destroyed, the hill was wiped out to create roadie material, and the house itself, quite dilapidated, the beams were taken out of it to make agricultural implements, and it's quite run down now, no longer occupied, like so many of these houses that we found that belong to New Zealand families. But when we arrived in the village this morning, the locals were very excited and very quick to direct us to this house at the name Bing Foon. They knew exactly where to go, brought us around here, and they were able to show us the comparison with the photographs I've bought from the family. Some of the ladies that brought us here were in those photographs, so it's not the first time there have been visitors here to Suriname looking for Bing Foon's house. Other than market gardening and providoring, the other institution introduced to Otago was the Chinese laundry. The earliest known Chinese laundry had its origins on one of the most remote Otago goldfields. The first Chinese laundry that we know about, the only one we know about in inland Otago, was up here in isolated, way up high, 945 metres, Serpentine. But the first well-known laundry baron began his trade at a lower level, in Lawrence. I'm standing here in the main street of Lawrence, at the turn-off to Gabriel's Gully, where the whole gold era had begun back in 1861. Now, Lawrence had been very anti-Chinese, as we know. In 1867, a law had been passed at the beginning of the town that no Chinese premises were allowed in the township, and they had to move out to the side to establish a camp to the north of the town. But by the early 1900s, that had all gone by the by. Gold was dying out, and the Chinese had to look for new opportunities in that era, and laundry work was one of those. So that we have a guy like Chin Foy from Suriname and Toi San, who comes out here in that post-gold seeker era and establishes a laundry here in Lawrence. Now, the original premises burnt out, and about 1908 he moved into the building behind me, where he operated both a laundry and a Chinese fruit shop, showing the way for the Chinese in the next years of the Chinese presence here. After the gold, the period of fruit shops, market gardens and laundries, in which Chin Foy was to have a great career. So after his time in Lawrence, Chin Foy went back to China, further family life there, but in 1915 he returned to Dunedin and established a laundry in St Andrews Street. Another one followed in Rattray Street, and a third in McLagan Street, and those businesses really prospered. Chin Foy was a generous man. He helped other people from Suriname come out to New Zealand. He put them up, he gave them jobs in his laundries, he helped them with money, really supported other people from the village and the wider community. He was a pivotal player in Chinese affairs in Dunedin, but he was also very well regarded in the European community. Always a very dapper dresser, Chin Foy, very polite and friendly, very well regarded by his customers. And his business really was one of the most successful Chinese businesses in Dunedin in the 1920s and 30s. Now, his son Eddie came out to join him in the 1930s. He went to school up the road, Christian Brothers School for a while, then he joined his father in laundry. But Eddie then, in the next generation, moved on to establishing Chinese eateries, the Speedy Cafe, the Hong Kong Cafe, and then nightclubs, so that by the 1960s, the nightlife of Dunedin was very much centred on Rattray Street here, with Eddie Chin at the heart of it all. And that focus on this area and the Chinese connection is beautifully referenced now in this recent mural, which shows Chin Foy right around the corner from his old laundry. Rattray Street's pretty run down now, but once upon a time this was a very busy street. In fact, probably the busiest street in Dunedin. The exchange area just behind me there was the hub of Dunedin's public transport system, and this was full of people moving back and forth, the trams, cable cars going up Rattray Street. So it was a perfect position for a fruit shop, and this is indeed where Chin Bing Foon's Sun Fruit Shop was, probably one of the most successful Chinese fruiteries in Dunedin. And of course Chin Foy's laundry, there were other Chinese laundries along here as well, so a very good position for business, and those two businesses were possibly the most successful Chinese businesses in Dunedin at that part of the mid-20th century.
And so the Chinese found new ways to provide for their families. But events unfolding back in China would change their dynamic as never before imagined.